China can't afford to invade Taiwan. Here's why. Let's talk about the most dangerous piece of land on the planet. It's not in the Middle East. It's not in Eastern Europe. It's a small island roughly the size of Maryland, sitting just 87 miles off the coast of China. And right now, it's the single location most likely to drag the world into a conflict nobody's prepared for. Taiwan. China wants it, has wanted it for decades. Xi Jinping has basically built his entire political identity around the idea that he'll be the man who finally brings it home. The military spending, the naval buildup, the increasingly aggressive posturing in the strait, all of it points in one direction. But here's what nobody is really asking. Can China actually afford to do this? Not militarily, not diplomatically. We mean financially, economically, and structurally. Can the China that Xi has spent 20 years building actually survive the aftermath of the war he keeps threatening to start? Because when you run the numbers, the answer's not what Beijing would like it to be. To understand why, you have to understand how China sees itself and how it ended up in this situation in the first place. China once called itself the Middle Kingdom, the center of civilization. And for most of recorded history, that wasn't arrogance. It was roughly accurate. China was the world's largest economy for centuries. Its territory was naturally defended. Mountains on one flank, thousands of miles of coastal acting as a barrier on the other. Then came what Beijing calls the century of humiliation. 100 years of foreign powers carving up Chinese territory, extracting its wealth, and making decisions about its future without asking. It ended officially in 1949 when the Communist Party took control and declared a new China. Except it didn't fully end. Because sitting 87 miles off the coast was a problem that never got resolved. When the Communists won the Civil War, the losing side, the Nationalists, didn't disappear. They retreated to Taiwan, took the government with them, and kept going. Today, Taiwan is a functioning democracy with a vibrant economy, its own military, and a population that, in survey after survey, identifies as Taiwanese, not Chinese. When asked directly, only 2% of people on the island say they consider themselves Chinese. About 7% support unification with the mainland. That's roughly the same percentage of people who think pineapple belongs on pizza. To Beijing, this is unfinished business. To Xi Jinping specifically, resolving Taiwan is the crowning ambition of his political legacy, the final chapter of the century of humiliation. He has staked enormous political capital on it. He has a deadline in mind, and he has spent the last decade building a military capable of making the attempt. So why hasn't he moved? Because the geography of what comes after is a nightmare he cannot escape. Look at a map of the region and something becomes immediately clear. China is boxed in. Running from Japan down through the Philippines to Indonesia is what American strategists call the first island chain. A string of territories that effectively contains China's naval access to the open Pacific. Taiwan sits at the center of this chain like a cork in a bottle. Right now, China's trade, 2/3 of it, moves through waters it doesn't control. Its energy imports are even more exposed. China burns roughly 15% of the world's crude oil. It imports 80% of what it needs. And nearly all of that flows through the state of Malacca, a choke point just 24 miles wide at its narrowest point, patrolled by the United States Navy. This is the source of what Chinese strategists call the Malacca Dilemma. In a conflict, Washington would not necessarily need to fight China directly. It could simply sit at Malacca and turn off the tap. No oil in. Economy starts suffocating within months. Xi tried to solve this with the Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion infrastructure project designed to build alternate trade routes through Central Asia and Pakistan, bypassing the choke points entirely. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor alone was supposed to give Chinese ships a shortcut from the Persian Gulf straight into Western China by road and rail. On paper, it looked elegant. In practice, it has stalled, run over budget, and delivered far less than promised. The old routes from the 1400s, the ones that run through the straits China doesn't control, are still the ones that matter. So Beijing is stuck, and taking Taiwan would theoretically break the lock. A Taiwan under Chinese control would shatter the first island chain and give China direct access to the Pacific. Ports rebuilt after a conflict would hand Beijing a gateway it currently cannot reach. The Strait of Malacca problem does not disappear, but the strategic picture changes dramatically. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, their trade routes would all run through waters Beijing could now influence or threaten. This is the real prize. Not history, not nationalism, geography. But getting there requires pulling off the most complex military operation in modern history, against opposition that's been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. Amphibious invasions are the riskiest operations in warfare, even under ideal conditions. You need to move troops across open water, establish a beachhead against a defended coastline, sustain supply lines under fire, and do all of this before the other side can reinforce or counterattack. The English Channel crossing in 1944 required years of planning, overwhelming air superiority, and total surprise, and it nearly failed anyway. China would have none of those advantages. A military buildup large enough to threaten Taiwan would be visible months in advance. The island has spent years preparing for exactly this. Under what military planners call the porcupine strategy, Taiwan has invested in making an amphibious assault as costly as possible. Not by trying to match China's military size, which it cannot, but by acquiring weapons specifically designed to destroy ships and aircraft before they reach the shore. Hundreds of anti-ship missiles, advanced fighter jets, rocket artillery systems, its own domestically developed hypersonic cruise missiles capable of hitting targets deep inside the Chinese mainland. Nearly 3/4 of Taiwanese say they would fight if Beijing moved. Civilians are signing up for military training. The island's not planning to surrender quickly, and a prolonged fight is the scenario China can least afford. Because prolonged means sanctions, and sanctioning China is not sanctioning Russia. China's economy is the second largest on Earth at roughly $17.8 trillion, about 17% of global GDP. It is embedded in supply chains that touch virtually every country on the planet. 8 out of 10 iPhones are manufactured there. Rare earth metals, the materials essential for electric vehicles, smartphones, wind turbines, and defense systems. China produces about 70% of global supply and handles 90% of the processing. The Atlantic Council estimates that banking sanctions on China comparable to those placed on Russia after 2022 would remove $3 trillion from the global economy almost immediately. That's the entire UK economy, gone in a matter of weeks. But the pain would not only flow outward. A Rand Corporation study estimated that a year-long conflict over Taiwan would cut China's GDP by 25 to 35%. The country that Xi has spent his entire political career building into a peer competitor of the United States would be set back by a generation. And there is a clock running that makes delay increasingly dangerous. China is aging faster than almost any major economy in history. Decades of the one-child policy have left a demographic structure that's narrowing rapidly at the base. By the time Xi's stated deadline of 2049 arrives, the centennial of the People's Republic, the median age in China will be nearly 52. Closer to retirement-age Japan than to the young growing United States. A military drawn from a shrinking pool of young men, funded by a budget increasingly consumed by healthcare and pensions, sustaining a multi-year conflict across open water against a defended island and a coalition of regional powers. The math does not work. And that coalition is the part Beijing may be most seriously underestimating. Japan cannot afford to stay neutral if China moves on Taiwan. 90% of Japan's energy imports and 1/4 of its total exports pass through the Taiwan Strait. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said explicitly that a Taiwanese emergency is a Japanese emergency. Tokyo has responded accordingly for the first time since World War II. Japan is developing offensive military capabilities and has committed to doubling its defense spending by 2027. That date was not chosen randomly. It was chosen in direct response to Xi's timeline. South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia are all drawn into the same strategic picture whether they want to be or not. The Philippines alone now hosts 9 American military bases, 5 of them positioned directly toward the Taiwan Strait. The United States has 54,000 troops in Japan, and another 25,000 in South Korea. In the event of a conflict, these are not bystanders. They are participants from day one. China would not be invading Taiwan. It would be invading a tripwire connected to the most significant military alliance the Pacific has seen since the Cold War, while simultaneously cutting off its own energy supply, triggering economic sanctions that would dwarf anything Russia has experienced, and attempting the riskiest military operation in modern history against an island that has spent years turning itself into a very expensive problem to attack. The capability exists, the ambition is real, the deadline is approaching. But the bill that comes after is one China cannot afford to pay. That is why the cork is still in the bottle. And that is why the question everyone is really asking is not whether China will invade Taiwan, but how much longer that answer stays the same. If this changed how you think about global conflict, make sure to subscribe to our channel. It helps more people find this video. And if you thought this was interesting, wait until you see this next.